Now, the plant in nearby Amherstburg that bottles Crown Royal, an iconic Canadian whiskey with a storied history, is closing and shifting work to south of the border.
They're hurting Ontario residents. They're hurting the people that work at Crown Royal.
Diageo says that Crown Royal products destined for the domestic market and non-U.S. marketplaces will continue to be bottled in Quebec.
Hey, welcome back to my channel. Do you know something just happened in Ontario that no one saw coming? And it's shaking one of Canada's most iconic brands? Crown Royal, the whiskey that many Canadians treat as part of their cultural identity, has announced that its Amherstburg bottling plant will close in early 2026. Nearly 200 jobs could disappear overnight. The news spread like wildfire. Doug Ford jumped in, urging a boycott. Opposition leaders called for Crown Royal to be pulled from LCBO shelves. And ordinary Canadians? Many said they felt as if a national treasure had just been handed over to the United States. But here's the twist most people aren't talking about. Crown Royal isn't leaving Canada entirely. The grains, the water from Lake Winnipeg, the distilling and aging, all of that still happens here. What's moving south is only the final step, the packaging. That raises a bigger question. Did Canada really lose its whiskey, or did it just lose the right to decide how the story gets told? Before we dive deeper, hit that like button if you're finding this eye-opening. It really helps us beat the algorithm. However, the reality is not as simple as it first appeared. While the headlines screamed about jobs lost and production moving south, the foundations of Crown Royal remain deeply tied to Canada. The grains are grown on Canadian soil, the water still flows from Lake Winnipeg, and the whiskey continues to be mashed, distilled, and aged in Gimli, Manitoba, following the same tradition established back in 1939. Even bottling hasn't vanished entirely. Facilities in Quebec still handle production for Canadian shelves and overseas markets, keeping a large share of the value chain at home. What's shifting to the United States is only the final touch, the packaging, the outer shell. The essence, the spirit that defines Canadian whiskey, is still rooted in the prairies and warehouses of Canada. That creates a strange picture. The United States may hold the label, but the true identity of Crown Royal remains firmly Canadian, which leads to a bigger question. In today's global trade, is it the shell that defines a product or the soul behind it? If you've made it this far, you probably care. Consider subscribing to stay updated. Yet beneath that contradiction lies a harder truth. This move is not just about shifting production, it is part of a deliberate economic strategy. Diageo has been pursuing its global Accelerate program, aiming to cut costs by $625 million over 3 years. Relocating bottling closer to American consumers fits neatly into that plan, reducing transport distances and streamlining distribution across North America. From a corporate perspective, the logic is clear. But in Ontario, the stakes look very different. The province's spirits industry adds more than $500 million to GDP each year and supports over 4,600 direct jobs. When a facility like Amherstburg closes, the ripple effect doesn't stop at the factory gates. It spreads to farmers supplying grain, trucking companies moving goods, and logistics providers managing exports. Even small disruptions can trigger shockwaves that extend well beyond the walls of a bottling plant. The question, then, is whether this is simply smart supply chain management or a calculated economic blow that leaves Ontario carrying the costs while the efficiency gains flow south. Looking at the bigger picture, whiskey is not just another consumer product. For Canada, it functions as a strategic asset in global trade. Ontario's spirits industry has long punched above its weight, with exports in 2018 alone reaching $441 million. That figure exceeded the combined value of beer and wine exports, underscoring how central whiskey has become to Canada's international profile. The provincial treasury also depends heavily on this sector. The LCBO, Ontario's Liquor Control Board, channels roughly $1.2 billion in annual dividends back into government coffers, and much of that strength comes from the spirits category. When a brand like Crown Royal dominates its market, the financial ripple benefits not only private shareholders, but also public budgets. In the United States, the brand's weight is even more striking. Crown Royal accounts for an estimated 42% of Canadian whiskey sales south of the border, holding a firm lead in a market where perception and loyalty matter. Its prestige was reinforced when Northern Harvest Rye earned the title of World Whiskey of the Year in 2016, a reminder that this is not merely an export, but a global ambassador of Canadian craftsmanship. In that light, any change to how and where Crown Royal is produced carries implications far beyond one factory closure. It touches on tax revenue, export strategy, and the symbolic role of Canadian whiskey as both an economic driver and a cultural signifier on the world stage. But the consequences extend well beyond export numbers and global recognition. At the local level, the shutdown of Amherstburg is not just a branding story, it is a direct hit to agriculture and employment. Every year, distilleries purchase more than $30 million worth of grain from Ontario farmers, forming a reliable market that helps stabilize crop revenues. If bottling shifts away, those relationships could weaken, leaving growers more exposed to fluctuations elsewhere. The employment impact is equally far-reaching. For every direct job inside a distillery or bottling plant, industry analysts estimate that 4 to 5 additional jobs are supported across trucking, warehousing, maintenance, and retail. On that basis, the loss of a single facility could add up to more than 7,000 job years over the course of a decade, a burden that would be felt not only by workers themselves but by the broader communities that depend on their spending power. In southwestern Ontario, the stakes are particularly visible. Essex County alone has been deriving around $116 million in GDP from the spirits industry, a figure that highlights just how intertwined local prosperity is with whiskey production. When a closure occurs in a region like this, the effect is not confined to headlines. It shows up in household incomes, in small businesses, and in the fabric of daily economic life. Within this disruption lies the chance for renewal. The closure of Amherstburg, while painful, could push Canada to rethink its whiskey industry and reduce dependence on one multinational. Losing a facility may, in turn, motivate greater diversification, stronger domestic brands, and new points of resilience. Across the provinces, smaller distilleries are already experimenting, from sherry and port casks to blends of regional grains, expanding Canada's whiskey profile beyond legacy names. These innovations, though modest in scale, appeal to global consumers who value authenticity and variety over uniform mass-market products. The absence of a major bottling hub could also open space for entrepreneurs to invest in packaging and distribution, keeping more of the value chain at home and creating jobs in logistics, branding, and export marketing. With the right support, new clusters of expertise could emerge. Government policy may accelerate this process. Ontario, reliant on LCBO revenues, has every reason to foster startups and mid-sized producers, signaling that whiskey is not only heritage but a sector for future growth. If these opportunities take root, Amherstburg's closure may ultimately be remembered not as a loss, but as the spark that strengthened the authentic Canadian whiskey label and reasserted Canada's place in the global spirits market. In the end, the story of Crown Royal exposes a striking paradox. On paper, Canada has lost a piece of production, the bottling, the visible finishing touch that many consumers first notice. Yet in practice, the essence of the whiskey has not crossed the border at all. The grain is Canadian, the water flows from Lake Winnipeg, and the barrels in Manitoba continue to guard decades of tradition. The United States may now host the packaging, but Canada still holds the substance, the part that gives the whiskey its identity. That distinction matters more than it might appear. In today's global marketplace, authenticity and origin are increasingly powerful selling points. Consumers often pay a premium for products tied to place and heritage, and the Amherstburg shock could, ironically, sharpen Canada's profile as the true home of this spirit. Far from eroding the brand, the shift might reinforce its credibility, allowing whiskey to function not only as an export, but as a form of soft power, a cultural ambassador that carries economic value and national identity abroad. The larger question, however, is whether Canada will choose to seize this moment. Could whiskey, long seen as a tradition and a legacy, evolve into a deliberate strategic asset, a soft weapon that projects both culture and commerce on the global stage? Or will it remain just another consumer product, its story told by others, while Canada quietly supplies the ingredients? The answer may determine not only the future of Crown Royal, but also how Canada positions itself in a world where narrative and authenticity are just as valuable as the product itself. Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like this. And let me know in the comments, do you think whiskey can truly become a form of soft power for Canada? Or is that reading too much into a bottle?